Hey all, it's Matt, your average gamer. Today we've got a really powerful mage build that's going to take on main bosses as well as tough bosses like Malenia and Placidusax. This is going to be a nearly universal setup that utilizes many different spells with buffs and a lot of firepower. Before we continue though, a quick mention to ExpressVPN. ExpressVPN is the VPN I use and trust. There's a discount link in the description below along with 3 extra months free. Now diving into this video, we've got a lot of bosses and ground to cover. This should be a fun one and includes a full main boss mage run and strategies for tough bosses you may have difficulty with from time to time. Everything is timestamped in the description below with each boss and the weapon or spell that was used during the battles. I decided to do a little bit of a fun intro for the beginning on this one, something different that I don't usually do, but it's going to show off some of what we're going to get into. We're going to take on some really tough bosses that includes Malenia, Placidusax, and all the main bosses. Can't wait to get into this one. Yeah, this should be an exciting video for those that like mage builds. This is going to be an awesome, pretty much universal setup that can carry you through the game. I think you're really going to like what we have to offer here. This is going to be an awesome build and setup that can make the game a lot easier. First up here is Margit. We're on New Game Plus 7, Journey 14, so everything has max HP. We'll use the Shackle here and Carian Slicer to chew through Margit's HP really fast. The build will be shown at the end, along with 150 stats to run this powerful mage build and setup. For anyone wondering how I sound that hasn't been following my videos lately, I'm running a little bit of an allergy type cold thing, and on top of that I've had this tooth issue for a while that's finally getting resolved this week, so that's why I'm a little bit low key. But without further detail, let's get into this one, and next up is Godrick. For Godrick, I felt like Adula's Moonblade would fit here because it does a good amount of damage, it has a wide sweep, and it does magic and frost damage. For Godrick, he's relatively slow, so you have the option to stay close. The only things to watch out here for are his windup that has an AoE and the ground slams from Godrick's Great Axe. Other than that, Adula's Moonblade can easily handle this as it's a powerful tool and generally speaking is my choice for mobs in most situations as a mage. This is a solid spell to add to your toolkit. If you haven't picked it up and you're running a mage build, definitely pick up Adula's Moonblade, it's awesome. Next up, and although it's not always mandatory, is the Magma Makar boss fight. I frequently take the Ruined Precipice, and if you go this way instead of the Grand Lift of Dectus, he ends up being mandatory on this route. For him, Glintstone Icecrag seemed like a good fit. It doesn't have a lot of range, but I wanted to save the more powerful stuff for the later and tougher boss fights. Even so, with this setup, you'll make quick work of him, just hitting him in the head with whatever spell you choose, as like any dragon, he takes additional damage to the head. And Glintstone Icecrag ended up doing fine here. We're able to do a lot of damage with this setup. We're using Lusat's staff and the Jellyfish Shield, and like I said, I'm going to show my entire mage build and setup towards the end, along with 150 stats. Radahn was my first death, and it took me 3 tries to defeat him. This was because I elected to first try Death Ritual Spear and it wasn't too great against him, so I eventually opted to use the Darkmoon Greatsword. Darkmoon Greatsword fits his build well, and you'll see later I only changed the shard for Graven Mass Talisman and everything else stays the same. So it's really easy to do a lot of damage with the Darkmoon's Greatsword beams because they're pure magic damage and they're boosted by the Godfrey Icon, Magic Scorpion Charm, and Ritual Sword's Talisman. Radahn would go down quickly as he barely made it past phase 1. Add in Terra Magika with the Darkmoon Greatsword and you'll absolutely crush whatever you're facing and do massive damage. Radahn is really easy to beat with some of his long combos, many of which are hard hitting but extremely slow. And down goes Radahn to a lot of frost and magic damage. I really like the Darkmoon Greatsword as a sidearm for a mage. Next up is the Draconic Tree Sentinel, and here we're going to be using Comet Azur. Yeah, so for the Draconic Tree Sentinel, I opted to show off a solid Comet Azur setup for you guys here, and he's the perfect boss to use Comet Azur on. He stays still mostly, and it makes life a lot easier. Use the order of buffing that I'm showing here, and you'll crush it. If you don't want to invest in Faith, you can use the Ash of War Golden Vow for an added boost. Yeah, he's really great to practice Comet Azur on. By the way, you would drink your tier last because it has the infinite FP tier in it, and just with the Jellyfish Shield and Lusat's staff, we're able to absolutely crush it. Let's get into the build. For the Comet Azur setup, we have Lusat's staff and the Jellyfish Shield. We have the Glintstone crown on, which will boost it a little bit as well. Graven Mass Talisman, Ritual Swords Talisman, Magic Scorpion Charm, Graven School Talisman, Magic tier, and then we have the Infinite FP tier as well. Next up is Golden Shade. Not a lot to talk about here. I elected for regular Comet in combination with Lusat's Glintstone Staff and the Jellyfish Shield. That's my primary setup when not using Night Comet. Golden Shade has low HP even on max scaling, so immediately cast Terra Magika, start hitting him with Charged Comet, and he's going to fall extremely fast. This boss is really easy as a mage, especially if you keep your distance. You can do massive damage to him. He doesn't even have that much HP even on New Game Plus 7. You should be able to take Golden Shade down very quickly with this setup as a mage. Comet was a great solution for that boss fight. Now, just once on here, I wanted to do my buffed up version of Night Comet, so I'm going to show on screen exactly the buffing order. First things first, we're going to bring our HP down. Don't worry, I'll show you all the equipment afterwards. And then we're going to proc the Black Dumpling, the Madness Helm, which gives you 10% more damage for a minute. And then, after that, we're going to get our HP down to that threshold, that 20% threshold for the Red Feathered Branch Sword. We're going to switch out to the Mushroom Crown. Because we're going to be poison procking here for the extra damage, we're going to fill up our FP, we're going to drink our tier. You can drink your tier first, it really doesn't matter here, though it is the longest duration, so you could use it first. Golden Vow, and then we're going to get ready to use Terra Magika, but first we're going to poison proc, finish the poison proc, heal with the boluses, then we're going to cast Terra Magika, then we get to use Night Comet. You're going to see on screen here, first one hits him. Well, actually, the first one missed. For a second one hits him for over 7,000 damage, and then we're able to 3-shot Morgott on New Game Plus 7 with Night Comet. And actually, looking at that clip, I think I may have forgotten Howl Shabriri after Golden Vow. I'm going to leave the link for the buffed up Night Comet version with all the details in the description below. For equipment, we have 2 Staves of Loss. We only have upgraded the one we're using, 60% boost on those in total. Mushroom Crown, Black Dumpling, Kindred of Rot's Exaltation, Red Feathered Branch Sword, Magic Scorpion Charm, Godfrey Icon, Infinite FP tier you don't really need, but we do need the Magic tier. The Fire Giant is a big foe, but fortunately for us he's got low magic resistance. Now you can buff up something like Carian Grandeur a ton and one-shot him if you time everything right, but I elected here instead to go for something more user-friendly and a Comet build that can hit him really hard. He ended up being fairly easy with Comet, and I started with the Moon by the way to get the debuff, as it has a bit of piercing and can do a ton of damage to the inside of his ankle, at least as far as Comet goes. This is a fairly easy fight for a mage, however it still did take me 3 tries. That was because I tried Death Ritual Spear again, because I wanted to use it on something, but the damage didn't impress, even with buffs. After switching to Comet and aiming for his ankles in Phase 1, and his hands for the most part in Phase 2, although they're a little harder to hit, the fight went decently quick and the Fire Giant's 64,000 HP on New Game Plus 7 would vanish, and we'd be moving on to Farum Azula to continue our adventure. And everything was going really well so far for the most part. I mean, we did try Death Ritual Spear a couple times against the Fire Giant Radahn. That didn't go too well, but overall we're doing a lot of damage to a lot of the mid-game bosses now. I guess the Fire Giant's technically a late-game boss, and we're going to be moving to that late-game stretch to use even more powerful setups for this mage build that can take down any boss. The Godskin duo was next, and for this I had Death's Poker in mind. This seemed like a solid option after using some sleeping pots. Death's Poker's Ash can do a few different things, but the left trigger and RB on Xbox is my favorite, leaving a frost trail that continuously does magic damage and frost buildup. This is an awesome and incredibly powerful Asher-born weapon, and once again, by swapping out one talisman, I was able to do a substantial amount of damage as we're using the Shard of Alexander again. I still believe Death's Poker is the most fun sidearm for a mage, as it's incredibly enjoyable to use. Yeah, this weapon sometimes is just stupid fun. It does so much damage. You have basically 3 different things you can do with it. You can either do 2 explosions, a follow-up big explosion of the Frost Trail, that's the one that I really like, and you can absolutely crush it as a mage because the Ash scales entirely with your intelligence stat. And without additional sleeping pots, the Godskin duo would put up a little bit of a fight at the end, but it doesn't matter because the odds are they're eventually going to walk over the frost part and it's going to continuously do damage. It does stay on the floor for a while, making it very powerful and a solid option for a mage build. Next up, we had Beast Clergyman and Maliketh. Now for Beast Clergyman and Maliketh, Night Comet made a lot of sense. When it comes to late game, there's not really a better spell in my opinion to use that doesn't involve standing still like Comet Azur doing a ton of buffs. Meteorite of Astal would also fall into that category. Clergyman, by the way, will rush you on subsequent attempts, so be aware of where you try to set up. Terra Magika, you're going to want to use it if you can in the first phase. Don't worry about it though when you get to Maliketh, it's just a little bit harder to set up on him. Now for phase 1 with Beast Clergyman, if you set up Terra Magic, you usually phase him in 3 hits. For Maliketh, don't even worry about Terra Magica. Stay close to him, even if it means getting hit, because his ranged attacks are much more annoying to deal with. Don't use Terra Magica, just focus on charging up Night Comet, get as many hits in as you can, and Maliketh will go down fairly quickly to Night Comet. And down goes Maliketh in mid-air, by the way. That was an awesome way to kill him, to defeat him, and move on to Ashen Capital, where our journey is going to continue with the next boss in Gideon. Now, for Gideon, I use Night Comet, and there's not going to be really much of an explanation needed here. He can't see it, won't dodge it, and he'll be trying to heal while you defeat him easily. With this method, you're not going to have to worry about facing him again a second time. Go in the first time, you're going to be victorious. He's going to do his whole speech. You can start hitting him, set up Terra Magica, and absolutely crush Gideon with Night Comet. Godfrey is a difficult boss for a mage at times, and he took me 2 tries here. Godfrey runs close a lot, so I elected to use Stars of Ruin. He's going to close in on you fairly quickly, which tracks a fair bit with the spell, and he's often going to run right into it, making a solid choice and spell to use against Godfrey. Keep your distance in phase 1, as Stars of Ruins can easily get him to phase 2 fairly quickly. Stars of Ruin. Phase 2 always, well for me at least, involves running around a little bit. He always starts with a grapple, but you can avoid it by just stepping a few yards back. Once he misses you, you can hit him some before he goes into complete fighting mode. At this time, try to keep some space and watch for his grapples, as on New Game Plus 7, the grapple can one-shot you even with 60 vigor and good armor. Horaloo does an insane amount of physical damage, so be aware of that. Any hits that aren't grapples though, you are likely to survive. Even as a mage, keep the pressure on him in some distance, and you'll crush phase 2 as well. Yeah, he can be a little bit of a difficult fight for a mage sometimes, especially when he gets into his whole stomp thing where he's going to crash on the whole arena, because it can stop you from casting and interrupt you a lot. But if you have something with tracking like Stars of Ruin, a solid build and setup, the one that I'm going to show later in this video, you can absolutely crush him with that amount of damage. And as he closes in towards you, he'll get hit with all of the spell. Next up is the final main game boss, and for Radagon we're going to be electing to use Night Comet because we end up beating Radagon in just over 30 seconds. This is relatively easy to do. If you follow exactly what I did to Radagon here, you can speed up the fight immensely. Just walk in the room, cast Terra Magica, start charging and hitting him with Night Comet. He will not block or deflect this spell. This is a quick way to defeat him and move on to Elden Beast. Now, on New Game Plus 7, Radagon has around 20,000 HP, and we're able to take him down in just probably about 30-something seconds from the first hit to the last hit. He was a relatively quick fight, but we're going to be moving on to Elden Beast, which is a much longer fight, and I'm going to talk about that here in a second. So initially for Elden Beast, I was thinking Comet Azur or Meteorite of Astal, but the problem is Elden Beast moves so frequently, they're often hit or miss. So I elected to show a strategy for Elden Beast rather than go for damage. We went for damage with a lot of the bosses, but for this one I elected to use a strategy because this boss I know sometimes people need help with, and Shard Spiral can be a powerful and efficient way to beat him. This is something that works really well for Elden Beast and Placidusax. The main thing here is that it's chargeable, so it fits our exact Night Comet build, although we're going to switch to Lusat's staff and the Jellyfish Shield. He'll go up, by the way, for his first ring shortly after taking roughly a third of his health, and at this point you have a chance to rebuff if you want to. After that, you can run towards him, though you'll notice I get holy spammed a lot in this battle more than usual. If you play the game multiple times, you've likely seen this before, and it can be a pain. Just avoid his attacks the best you can, and try to close the distance, and sometimes he will run, but don't worry too much. Remember, this is more of a stamina check and less of an actual boss fight. The main goal here is to close the distance on him as much as you can, and again, as I mentioned, he is going to run away frequently, but if you can get close to him and bait some physical attacks, you can use Shard Spiral to shoot through his HP and get to the point where he does Elden Stars, because that's about the halfway point through the fight, and Shard Spiral will continue to do a lot of damage as it pierces and continues to damage as it goes through him. Elden Stars you can run from and heal if need be, and you can get in some damage while he's activating Elden Stars if you happen to be close to him, because it has a very long animation. You may eventually go up for his additional second rings, which have 3 rings. After those, it's going to be basically a fairly basic moveset for the most part. It does a lot of physical attacks at the end, and then you can easily bring him down with Shard Spiral after the rings. But as you can see, before we got to that point, while we were doing and actually running from Elden Stars and trying to use Shard Spiral on him, we were getting holy spam continuously. That is really common when Elden Stars comes out. He will spam you. Sometimes you'll get the rings during Elden Stars and also the beams as well, and the combination can be deadly. So be sure to look out for that. Keep your distance, and then once you outrun Elden Stars, everything gets a lot more simpler in the final phase of the fight. And keep in mind, technically speaking, Elden Stars is not a phase because he can use it again, but if you're able to close the distance after the 3 rings and towards the end of the fight, you can close out the fight without ever seeing Elden Stars a second time. And as you can see in this boss fight, he did run away from me a lot, and that isn't abnormal for Elden Beast. Sometimes you get lucky and he doesn't run away this much, but here it was a little bit ridiculous and kind of taxing. He was running away constantly from me, and when he wasn't running away, he was spamming me with whatever holy damage he could spam me with. Finally went up for the 3 rings towards the end when he barely had any HP at all, but once we avoid these, we can finish off Elden Beast and move on to Placidusax and Malenia. Radagon and Elden Beast can be a pain sometimes, and they did take me 3 tries, which was 1 less than Beast Clergyman and Maliketh, and Malenia ends up taking me 4 as well, so it's 1 less than the top 2, which were Beast Clergyman, Maliketh, and Malenia, both took 4 tries, but even so, 3 tries on Radagon and Elden Beast. Not too bad overall with a combination of Night Comet and Shard Spiral. And that is more of a strategy, as I went for damage with a lot of the bosses, and I could have tried to set everything up as far as Comet Azur and Meteorite of Astal and ended up one-shotting him on New Game Plus 7. I've done it before with both, believe it or not. I've done it with Ancient Dragon Lightning Strike, but sometimes it's just not as logical, so I wanted to use Shard Spiral here to show off a strategy, and it did work well. 2 more bosses here, Malenia and Placidusax. Malenia, like Radagon, can be beaten with Night Comet, but I wouldn't say it's incredibly easy. It's just not hard either. The only issue with range attacks is it triggers Waterfowl very frequently, but if you're far away, you'll likely only have to dodge the last part of it, which makes it substantially easier. By the way, I mentioned this before, but Malenia took 4 tries, so that was tied with Beast Clergyman and Maliketh for the most on this run. For those wondering or keeping track, I'll keep a count below in the description. Everything's going to be in the description below, by the way, that you need. This is an effective strategy as far as Night Comet. You can charge it, and you can easily get her to second phase using Night Comet and pacing the fight. Keep in mind, by the way, that you will see her sidestep occasionally. When she's sidestepping, that's just a random AI action that happens when you hit her. That's not an actual dodge. She can't see Night Comet, just like Gideon and Radagon can't see Night Comet. So it's really to your advantage to use this spell against her. It can be a very effective method for defeating Malenia. Phase 2 isn't too difficult, but she will be in your face a lot more often during this phase. The main thing is, after the Rot Flower, after you avoid that, you can run under it and then roll back to avoid it. You can cast Terra Magika and then start charging up Night Comet, and there's a very decent chance you're going to get her HP down to near half at that point, if done right. I think I elected to use Death's Poker really quickly in here and it didn't work out, but that was just something I felt like throwing in. For most parts, for most of the time that I'm going to do this, I'm going to be running Night Comet the entire way. I think I was trying to get a Frost proc for extra damage, but if you continue with Night Comet during that, you're going to chew through her HP. She'll have half at most coming out of it, and the second phase of the fight's going to be a lot shorter. Keep in mind, yeah, you don't have to charge this. You can just hit her with it regularly if it comes to that at that point in the fight. But if you do charge it, you're going to get a lot more damage out of it. Just keep your distance from her. Keep using Night Comet on her. This is a very effective way for taking down Malenia. And yes, you can Comet Azur her second phase, but you still have to have a method for going through her first phase to get to that point. I still recommend Night Comet. I still do believe it's the best spell in the entire game, and it works efficiently on her as it does with most bosses. As you can see, she went down at a fairly decent speed using just Night Comet. Now before we show Placidusax, and I think the 150 stats are after that, we're going to show the build off real quick before we get into the ending and all that. For buffs, we're drinking our Tear, casting Golden Vow, using Howl Shabriri, then we're using Terra Magika. After we use Terra Magika, we can use Night Comet, whatever spell we want to, and we're going to get into the build here right now. For the Night Comet build and setup, we have 2 Staves of Loss. We're using Lusat Staff and the Jellyfish Shield for everything else. We have the Shard of Alexander, but if you're doing only spells, you're going to use the Graven Mass Talisman, Ritual Swords Talisman, Magic Scorpion Charm, Godfrey Icon, and then we have the Magic tier, and then you're going to use the Faith tier if you're going to be doing the 150 stats I'll show towards the end. Now for those that want a high level PvE build, this is my level 200 stats on my mage that I did this on, but after Placidusax I have 150 stats that I want to show you, and they're going to be solid for this build that you can run and get completely comparable damage. Last one here is because people have trouble with him. I decided to put in Placidusax. I ended up including him. We're going to end up using Shard Spiral, much like Elden Beast. It has a piercing effect on large targets and can do 5,000 to 7,000 damage, making quick work of the bigger bosses in the game. Staying close here is really ideal for Placidusax because of the fact that he has such a large hitbox. So after the lightning, you can bring down his HP real low. At this point, keep the pressure on him because if you beat him before he does the beam, life is a lot easier before he does the beams. Once again, on New Game Plus 7, he can actually one-shot you at 60 Vigor, much like Godfrey or Horalu's grapples, with even 60 Vigor and decent armor with the beams. So we're going to try to avoid that by using Shard Spiral and getting as much damage as we can and try to skip that part of the fight. And trust me, with Shard Spiral you can take him down in no time because of that piercing effect that it goes through him and continuously does damage. Keep in mind on New Game Plus 7 he has 38,000 HP, that's even 7,000 more than Elden Beast on New Game Plus 7. But even so, by the way, base game he has 26,000. You can take him down at a decent speed using Shard Spiral, and if you can get in Terra Magika for even more damage. And after he ends up coming down here with the lightning, by the way, if you actually roll towards the inner part of it, you won't get hit by it. If you roll on the outside of it, you will get hit by it. The advantage here is that we're a mage. We don't have to hit him with melee attacks, so he's not going to get this whole lightning thing going on, and we're able to take him down with Shard Spiral by rushing him after that point. Alright, we're going to get into the Shard Spiral build, basically the build that we're using for everything that's not Night Comet, and with that we have Lusat Staff and the Jellyfish Shield, and then we have the Graven Mass Talisman, Ritual Swords Talisman, Magic Scorpion Charm, Godfrey Icon, and then we have the Magic tier as well. Now these are the same 200 stats as before. If you're just doing PvE, you continue to just level up. For PvE, there's really no meta. Now, as far as if you want to do PvP or if you want to stay at 150, I have the 150 stats for you here. Now, for the 150 stats, we have 50 Vigor, 25 Mind, 20 Endurance, and 20 Strength for the Jellyfish Shield, 15 Dexterity, 68 Intelligence, and then 23, which is 33 Faith with the Faith tier. You can do all the buffs you want. Thanks for watching this one, as this was my most powerful mage build that, other than one clip, didn't include a ridiculous amount of buffing. I know some of us prefer simpler setups sometimes. You'll do a ton of damage with the dual Staves of Loss by themselves, as most bosses you'll crush with this powerful mage build. Be sure to sub, definitely check out the builds on the channel, and as always, thanks for watching.